Hi, Angela here. One of the most common questions I get is, how long should my resume be? Well, let's start with the most common myth and the reason why you might be even asking this question in the first place. And that is, your resume needs to be one page. Contrary to popular belief, your resume does not need to be one page. Well, it would be one page if you're a perhaps recent graduate and you don't have any work experience. Then, of course, it makes sense that you would have one page. In fact, it's very popular for colleges and universities to teach this very thing to students that they need to have a one page resume. But we're going to go ahead again and bust that myth and talk about what it is that you really need and what recruiters want. Now, I'm not the only person who does not care for a one-page resume. I have talked to many recruiters over the years, and they agree with me that you don't need to squeeze everything into one page, even though that's what you see out there, one-page templates. Many of them are kind of in that infographic style, that two columns where you have to fit everything into one page, where it looks like it's maybe a profile with a picture. One client that I worked with called it a teaser resume. And I've heard this from recruiters as well, who've said that really kind of only 5%, maybe less than 5% people can get away with a teaser resume. You know the kind I'm talking about. They are skinny. Another recruiter I talked to called it a skinny resume. And she was funny. And she's a millennial, by the way. And she said, I would rather have a resume that has some meat and potatoes, not one that's on a diet. But you know the kind I'm talking about, the kind that looks like this. This is a beautiful, graphically designed profile style resume, teaser style resume that I found on Canva. And it's laid out in the two column format, has the picture, it has the graphic elements. It takes so much space, these various elements, that you can't really put the information that is needed to express yourself and your qualifications as a candidate. There's nothing really for the recruiter to glom onto and to understand about you. So let's don't do this. Let's don't use this style of resume. Instead, let's go with a more traditional type of resume. That's what most recruiters really prefer, is a more traditional layout where there's more information. And yeah, that takes more than one page. So let's look at what a recruiter is looking for when they're looking at the resume. They're looking at, what role have you been in? What role are you seeking? That has to be very clearly delineated for them and explained. And then the other things that they are looking for is, of course, your work history. They want to know, yes, you've had this role, you've worked where, for how long, doing those things. So looking at your work history is important. And this gives them a level of experience that you have as well. That is going to be important for them to understand. The other thing that a lot of people overlook on their resume that's very important to have in there is the evidence of your impact. And so the accomplishments that you have, the achievements that you've made, the metrics, the numbers, the impact. So it's not just, I can do this, but here's the evidence of what you can do. Now, why am I telling you all of this? Why am I saying all of these things when really you're wanting to know, how long should my resume be? Well, when you find out that what your resume needs to have, that question needs to be answered, it's 2 pages. I'll just give it to you straight there. It's 2 pages. That's how long it needs to be. And you need to fit all of that in there. So what I want to do is, before I get kind of into how do you put these things into 2 pages, I really think it's important to understand, especially if you have a lot of experience, how do you get all of this in here? And by the way, this is the answer to the question, how long should your resume to be, whether you're an executive or not as well. So executives used to get away with longer resumes way back in the day, but these days, really, you've got to get it into 2 pages. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit later, in a short few minutes, about the things you can do. I have a few ideas on how you can streamline content to make sure everything fits into 2 pages, but still be a good narrative about yourself and answer those questions that the recruiters want to see on your resume. So let's get into the summary section, because in order to be able to give you my streamlining tips to be able to fit everything in 2 pages, I really need to talk about the summary section, the very first section at the top of the resume, where after your name, before you get into the work history, what does that say there? That's where all of these things that the recruiter is looking for can be really summarized there. So let's talk about the what makes a good summary profile. In my other video that I have about getting into the summary section and what makes a good summary section, and I go into it in depth, I will talk about these 4 elements. But right now, let's just go ahead and kind of skim over these 4 elements, just so you can have an understanding of what those are, okay? But check out this video if you're interested in knowing more about that. All right, so the 4 main elements that you're looking at in a summary section that I think make a really good summary section. And speaking as a former recruiter, this is what I used to look for as well. And the first one is the role or function. So remember I told you before, they're looking for what role or function you've had in the business, in the work that you've done. You've got to clearly state that at the top. No adjectives, fluffy adjectives, dynamic, hardworking, accomplished, none of that. They want you to get right in and tell them this is the role that or function in the business that you perform and that you're qualified to do. So that has to be in the summary. They also want to see the personal brand is the way where you can sum up those things about your key strengths and those areas of expertise that you have. And there's different ways to portray that information in the summary section. Again, in the other video, I'll get into that. The relevant skills, this is like the keywords or phrases list that you usually see, core competencies, sometimes we call it that, core competencies, but those various hard skills that you need in order to perform the role that you do so well. These are the terms of your business, the terms of your profession, the skills that you're needing to do. Okay, so that needs to appear in the summary section as well. And then again, the evidence of impact. So how have you made certain accomplishments or achievements? And there's ways to put that in your summary section as well, so that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, about how that helps to streamline the content in your resume. So evidence of impact showing up in your summary is important. You're not just saying what you can do, but you're showing how you can do it. You're providing evidence of the impact you'll make. And this is how you'll make your resume stand out, by the way. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the experience section and how you can streamline the content in your experience section. There are 3 tips that I have for you, 3 ways that I'm going to go into how you can streamline that content. And the first one I want to talk about is how you can put your information into early or prior experience. So you have your work history, and then after your work history or at the end of your work history, you can put earlier experience or prior experience. So I have a couple of examples for you here. Let's just say you have this section and it's older experience, maybe not as relevant as your more recent experience. You can actually shrink it down to where it looks just like this. So you can put them into a bullet point format, put a little label over it, early career experience if you want to. Or you can take a section that looks like this and then turn it into something even smaller, where it's just a few lines, where you're not even bulleting things, you're just putting the information down. So there are ways to streamline your work experience. For those of you who have experience that you're in a mid-level career position, you're an individual contributor, you can probably just put 10 or 15 years experience, and anything prior to that you can do like this, or you can actually omit it. If you're an executive, you really need to show the career ladder that you've been on. So you may really require to do something like this, where you're condensing the prior or earlier experience in your career. Okay, so the second rule that I have for you, second tip that I have for you is this rule: 5 bullets or less. Try to say things in your experience section in 5 bullets or less. You don't have to give them a complete workup of everything you've done in that role, especially if you've held that role for a long time. Really just give it to them in 5 bullets or less. Now, the further back you go in time, the less bullets you need. So maybe older positions, you might go only 3 bullets. And your more recent roles, you might have 5 bullets. So try to look. recruiters don't want to read paragraphs and they don't want to read a lot of bullets because if they have a lot of bullets, it's as good as reading a paragraph. So that's just a rule of thumb that I like to use is try to be concise. Your resume, you only have 2 pages, so you really need to be concise. Before we get into the third tip, let's talk about how you can put things into 5 bullets or less, okay? One of the things you can be doing is thinking about how can you reduce repetition. And so a lot of times I'll see people will be putting a lot of information over and over and over again, especially if they've had similar roles or they've gone through promotions where they've just added responsibilities. So how do you want to reduce the repetition of that information? Well, that's where your summary section comes in. You can use your keyword or key phrase list in your summary to be able to capture that information or capture those skills without having to really write sentences or statements about it in the experience section. The other thing you can do is ask yourself there's a couple of questions you can ask yourself about the relevancy of the content. So is what you're saying about the role and describing the job, is it relevant to one, what you want to do going forward? So in the next role that you're pursuing, do you want to be doing this sort of thing? So you want to emphasize the things you want to emphasize, not just everything you've ever done. So that's how you get more concise. And the second thing you want to ask yourself, is it relevant to what the potential employer wants you to do? So if it's not, and it's really just kind of obvious that in order to get where you've gotten in your career, you've had to do the things that are obvious that everyone would have to do you need to include all that information? So ask yourself those questions about whether it's relevant to what you want to be doing next, and also whether it's relevant to what the employer wants you to be doing next. And thirdly, you can use impact statements. So rather than putting all of these accomplishments and metrics and achievements in the work experience section in that area, you can actually just do the impact statements. Just put a few. That's all you need. Few highlights from your career with those metrics, those highlights in the summary section. So use the summary section, what I like to call the career highlights. So these are highlights from your career that show projects or certain achievements or initiatives that you've worked on that you have impact. Okay, so you can list those in your summary. All right, so the last tip I have for you is these are actually two. I have 2 bonus tips for you. What to do with the content that you're leaving out. So if you've gotten your question answered, 2 pages, how to streamline, great. You're good. But if you want to stick with me here, I've got a couple of little extra golden nuggets for you. What to do with the content that you're leaving out. Because I see this all the time. My clients tell me, so Angela, what do I do with this information? It's good information. I don't want to lose it. I need to be able to express this and be able to tell people what I've done. And I mean, after all, it is your accomplishment. It is the work you've done and it's valuable. So what do you do with it? All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is something we call the addendum or the resume addendum. So this is where you can put together an extra form, an extra document. So you have your 2-page resume and then you have an extra document formatted like your resume. And in it, you can list all sorts of extra information, extra credentials that you have, educational credentials, training credentials. You can put in there, of course, projects and initiatives that you've worked on with those metrics and those numbers if you have them. So you can show those different types of things. And you can actually have this as an attachment with your resume. So I recommend resume addendums in certain circumstances, and this is especially useful for executives because executives have more information and more body of work, generally speaking, so they may need a resume addendum. And that's the solution for we don't have 3 and 4-page resumes anymore for executives. Instead, we have 2-page resumes with an addendum. All right, and the other tip I have for you is utilizing online profiles for that extra content. So the nice thing about, say, LinkedIn, for instance, LinkedIn, if you have a profile on LinkedIn, there's all these extra sections. You can put in there, honors and awards. You can put in all your extra training and certifications. So on your resume, you might put the most critical ones or the most recent ones, and then you can put the rest of them listed in LinkedIn. You might have a volunteer experience that you've done, a community service, or professional associations you belong to. There are places for all of that in LinkedIn, but yet on your resume, you only have 2 pages. So you may only put a little bit or none of that. And it's all in LinkedIn instead, or on a resume addendum. The other thing you can think about too is using, if you have profiles like Behance, which is for creatives that have Adobe skills. They often have a Behance account, or you can have a video profile account with People Showcase. Disclaimer, I'm a co-founder of peopleshowcase.com video profile site, so you might want to check them out. And then the other thing you might look at too is if you end up putting, a lot of information out there, maybe you want to include links like your Facebook or links like your Behance, and you have also a LinkedIn profile and so forth. You may want to put these links on your profile. It's very common for people to have a profile link for LinkedIn on their resume. But what if you have a lot of profiles? What if you have your own website? That happens where we have some people who we work with that have a portfolio website where they have all of their information and samples of work and everything on a website or on their People Showcase website. So what they might do then is have a link tree or an about.me account where they can actually just have one page with all those links on it, and then they can just share that link on their resume. And there you have it. The answer, short and sweet, to your question is 2 pages. And only 1 page if you're really inexperienced. Otherwise, feel comfortable, go for it. 2 pages. And I hope you'll join me on my next video where we dive a little bit more into more tips on resumes. See you next time.